Ever since I started this series, I've gotten a ton of requests to do one of the two archer characters of Sacred Stones, either Renais or Ines, as it is generally believed those will be the hardest runs in the game to do. And while I had my mindset on making a Renais run much earlier in the lifespan of this series, it has proven to be quite a challenging experience, especially getting out of the early game. So I finally caved and decided to see how a bow lock character can function if I can easily get out of the early game. And today I'm trying to solo Sacred Stones using a fully bow locked character with the Prince of Freya himself. Ines will be an interesting case study because there is a good chance that he might not finish the run, since he can't attack at one range and only at two, since there is no bow in Fire Emblem Sacred Stones that attacks at one range. So if he ever gets surrounded, it's pretty much GG. And that is a fact that is often brought up in the comment section of videos. A lot of people believe it is impossible for him to solo the game, and while I won't spoil the video for you all, you'll have to watch until the end to find out. I want you to pause the video right now, and in the comments, if you believe Ines can't complete the run, drop in the comments your best guess on what chapter you believe the run will die on. And no cheating and looking ahead, drop your best guess in the comments now. And if you believe he can finish the run, also comment it below. I want to know how you guys are feeling about this going in. Alright, now that this is done, let's look at some ground rules. The rules are the same as always. Hard mode, no glitches or cheats, only a single healing item per map. I am not allowed to use the convoy to grab more healing items. I can, however, grab more healing items from natural ways such as chests, enemy drops, and friendly reinforcement trades. And of course, the final rule, I can only use Ines to kill units and clear the maps. Alright, as the first few maps play and you see how I handle them, let's talk about Ines on paper. Before we even get to the bases and growth here, I must say that the initial challenge comes from his starting inventory. The only weapon he starts with is his silver bow, which has 20 uses. So you'll see me avoid fighting as much as possible in the early maps. That is to make sure I do not run out of uses, especially for chapter 2, which is a route map. And that problem will be solved the following map, as we'll take Renais' iron bow to allow us to continue without much trouble. But it was a close call nonetheless. So much so that in chapter 2 I decided not to save Garcia like I usually do, since his inclusion in the map gives me a pretty good chance to save 2 uses, since he can kind of kill 2 units on his own. So I do get to save a little bit on the bow there, if everything goes well, that is, because he can also die. With that being said, I was genuinely worried that Ines would get soft locked this early, but crisis averted. On screen right now, you should see Ines' starting stats, and honestly, it's not bad. Being a pre-promoted unit, he does get that edge over other units. But when compared to other pre-promotes, he actually has a similar spread to Seth and Cyrene. Ines on paper's performance should be fine. When it comes to his growth, well, there isn't much to say, as everything except HP, which is below average, sits right about on the average or close to it at least. So I'm not expecting any stats to immensely suffer, but I'm also not expecting him to blow me away. Ines being a sniper will also benefit from the skill Sure Strike, which activates based off of his level as a % chance. This skill allows him to hit 100% of the time when it procs. While it can be useful, I don't think it's a particularly useful skill, given that his hit rate will more often than not be more than enough. And in Sacred Stones particularly, the enemies have pretty bad dodge, so Ines should be fine generally even without the skill. But at least he has it. It is an extra plus in his camp. Alright, now that all of that is out of the way, how does he perform truly? The main thing I'll have to keep in mind with this character is to avoid getting surrounded. And you'll see it quite often in the gameplay, and where I end up positioning being a little different than usual in certain cases. The second thing you'll notice is how much I'll attempt to play around one tile corridors. The reason being, as long as I don't get surrounded, those long-winded hallways kind of give me an advantage to take out all the enemies before things start getting dicey. So as long as no units can come from behind, I tend to be safe in those one wide hallways. Our first real stop will actually be chapter 5, and that's because we'll have to make a choice. Since Ines can't take advantage of the enemy phase that much since she can't really counterattack, that will slow him down generally, and that means allowing pretty much all the bandit reinforcements to show up before I can make some good progress on the map. So saving both the Dragon Shield house and the Secret Book house without being surrounded becomes kind of an issue. So I have to choose one of them to save, and I have to let the other one go. The Dragon Shield house will be the easier target of the two to protect since it's closer to where you spawn, and I also think it has the most valuable of the two stat boosters. Given that Ines is a sniper, having less of a need for high skill given the sure strike skill that we did talk about earlier. So skill in this case becomes more useful for crits than kind of anything else. And his defense growth being slightly lower, the Dragon Shield becomes a little bit more valuable in that case, giving him a lot more survivability, hence why I'll go down that route. I'll end up going for the Dragon Shield. Other than that, once that initial wave passes, it'll be a matter of slowly taking out the enemies and we'll kind of clear this map without a hitch. I'll then stop on chapter 6, which is kind of a first for the series, but there are a few good reasons this will be interesting to observe. This map is one where it becomes very easy to be surrounded. The middle of the map has a lot of enemies and there are a few horse reinforcements that will surround you from the back pretty quickly. So my strategy is quite simple. Instead of going through the crowded middle, I'll position myself at the top of the map with my back against the hills. That way Ines, who can walk on those easily, always has a way out. He can go from one side to the other to dip depending on what unit is on which side pressuring him. While the horses are kept waiting around since they can't step on those hills. So it does allow me a leeway out of this. I get to clean up the majority of the reinforcements that way, and then I make my way to the boss pretty much skipping the whole bottom section. And the map can be pretty much summed up like this. It is a pretty easy map for Ines once you've figured out this little tech. There is, however, one issue, and it's not really an Ines issue really, but using this strategy slows you down a lot, and the spider has enough time to kill the villagers, which means no Orient Bolt. It's good in this case that Ines is already promoted because he doesn't need it. But it does inform us that while we have a strategy for Nami's run on this map to survive using the hills, we are also a little bit in trouble because getting the Orient Bolt is kind of crucial to that character just to be able to promo at an appropriate time. However, that is a problem for another day and for me of the future. I just thought it would be an interesting thing to point out right now so that you guys have something to look forward to. Now let's quickly talk about chapter 7, and it's absolutely not an issue. I go up top, use the ballista because, you know, not that it's necessary, it's just fun. And since Ines is already promoted, he has higher movement, which means river crossing is available and I get to breeze through this map quite quickly. It's time for chapter 8, and this chapter is a very interesting problem. The main issue of this map usually is saving Ephraim and crew from the reinforcements, and I would say that in 70% of cases it really isn't much of an issue because you have plenty of time to walk over there and through the enemy phase kill all the units that run at you. However, since most enemies in this section don't have a range option, it's hard to take them out quickly. We have to do it one player phase at a time, which allows Kyle, Ford, and Ephraim to get surrounded and taken out pretty quickly. And we'll run into a couple of game overs and resets as I try to figure out this problem. In the past, when saving Ephraim proves to be too long of a challenge, I usually go for stall tactics and hope for some luck while I rush the boss and attempt to kill Tirdo before Ephraim dies. But here this strategy won't work as Ines will take twice as long to reach the boss than any other units. So that is somewhat of an impossible scenario or one that requires crazy luck. So I have to go left first and save him. That's kind of like essential for this run. So how do we go about this? We will employ some of the normal stalls tactic to slow down Ephraim's death before Ines gets to them. So we'll sit our calves in the corner holding onto the Lord and healing as much as possible as Ines makes his way slowly to the left. So this allows for two things. First, because Ines is closer than Kyle and Ford to the archer that usually comes down and attack Ephraim's crew, that archer will come towards Ines instead here. So that's one less piece of damage to worry about on that left side. side. So a little bit of luck taken out of the equation. Second thing, if we position Ines on the wall that connects to that little squared room, we'll get a chance to kill the mage before he joins the party and does the same thing as the archer usually does, which is add an element of damage to the cavaliers. That way we can intercept him before and kill him on the enemy phase. So that's 2 less enemies the left side crew has to deal with at the moment. Then it's all much like we previously said. We have to kill each melee unit one by one through the choke point before we get to Ephraim. And both cavaliers in their mission to protect their lord will perish. So please F's in the comments for our boys Kyle and Ford for their worthy sacrifice, because all that stalling allows Ephraim to survive long enough and Ines can come rescue his rival finally. And we can then move on with the rest of the map. Quick aside, I always find it weird that Ines and his supports is obsessed with Ephraim, yet they don't have a support together. And I don't think Ephraim in his supports ever mentions Ines. I might be wrong on that one, but the rivalry seems to be pretty much one-sided. Poor Ines. It's okay. You're the star of the show for this video, buddy. So enjoy that moment. But I digress. You'll see me make a small adjustment here that I never usually do for other runs, and that is going through the left side corridor instead of going to the angelic robe room right away. And this is, as I've said before, because I want to take advantages of the long-winded hallways that give Ines a little bit of a buffer room to not get surrounded. This is what I do here, even though there aren't a lot of threats left on this map anymore. It does also give me a potential backup for when the mage reinforcements do spawn once I get over the wall that you have to break. So if it becomes a little overwhelming, I can kind of like hold up in that corridor and be fine. But it won't come into play this time around. The other reason I go the long way around is because it allows me to be a little safer against the night room. Since I get to take out one from over the left side wall before I can make my way in the room, I reduce my chances of being surrounded. This isn't really a huge problem. It's just I decided to take the safer route. I could have probably taken them out one by one normally, but I didn't want to risk anything. So I pick up the angelic robe and then go fight Tirado, who by the way has some pretty good defense. Ines with 18 strength at this point only does 6 damage with the iron bow. So kind of you don't think about it sometimes, but he can be a formidable boss early on. But even though he dodges an 89% chance to hit, we chip him down and can finally move on to the route split and chapter 9. Chapter 9, our old unexpected nemesis. This map has come up so often as a problem in recent videos. It's actually kind of fascinating. I was never expecting this map to be a problem ever. But for Ines, it's actually a pretty big deal. You see, this is a route map with massive amounts of reinforcements and half of the map straight up just running at you from the get-go. So how do we handle this without being surrounded by a million enemy units? The reality is you don't. There's simply no way not to get surrounded at some point on this map. There are simply too many units just running at you and not enough space in the starting area to kite them around. So would the run be dead? Then, right? That's logical. We finally get soft locked and those who guessed chapter 9 in the comments were right? Well, not quite. Not quite. Hold up. Don't leave the video just yet. There is one thing we can do on this map that does allow us an out. You see, on this map, there is one unit I never talk about that is force deployed, and that is Tana, who usually I just throw on the side and stop thinking about. But she is force deployed on this map. And while I can't use her in combat to not skirt the rules, or I can't use her to rescue Ines in a better spot, I would also consider that just cheating. I can simply put her in range of the enemies. And because she's so weak, they will try to attack her. And since she has no weapons, she can't counterattack. This, once all the reinforcements are killed, allows Ines to dislodge himself from this problematic position and finish off the last 2 enemies. So one little movement of Tana allows us to just slip through. So before we go any further, we do need to address if this is breaking the rules or not. I personally consider it okay for a couple of reasons. First of all, using force deploy or ally units to manipulate the enemy AI isn't something that is strictly banned in the rules, but also it is something we've done in previous runs. The main example being Kyle and Ford protecting Ephraim on chapter 8, or Dusel doing the same on chapter 15. But in the Eirika video, if you remember, we had Natasha talk to Joshua to grab the killing edge, or even sometimes Franz and Gilliam manipulating the AI on chapter 1 when the unit we are starting with is too weak to take on all the enemies at once. So there are many examples of this kind of stuff happening in the series. So I personally think it's okay to use force deploys to manipulate the enemy a little bit. But I do understand if you are not in the same camp as I am. So if you don't like that, you can consider the soft lock to happen on chapter 9 and I wouldn't blame you. But for the purpose of making this video more interesting and seeing how far we can push this run using all the resources available to us, we'll keep going. Now on to chapter 10, and this map won't really be tough, it'll just be annoying. Once again, we move really slow, keeping the green units alive will suck, and the reason we want them alive is that Tethys has a goddess icon and stat boosters tend to be quite important, so we want it, and you need both Tethys and Garrick alive for them to join you. Usually we can rush out to Pablo quite quickly and make sure there isn't any issues. And here, since we can't enemy phase most enemies once again, we have to move slowly. And Tethys is really weak, so we kind of have to reset every time she dies. But eventually I get annoyed enough that I say screw it and let her die without getting the goddess icon, because it was really starting to piss me off. To be fair, I didn't want to really play for that luck for 2+ luck. It didn't feel really necessary given that by this point Ines had 20 points in luck already, so it felt high enough to not be dependent on a little goddess icon. So I decided to say screw it and then just move on to kill the boss and move on to chapter 11, because sometimes you gotta know when to give up on certain things for the purpose of progress. This chapter will be a first in this series, because for the first time ever, I'll use a torch. I've never used a torch in the entire series. It's the first time. Since we are playing in the dark, you get easily surrounded in the dark if you don't know where the enemies are coming from, so I figured that more vision is a little safer. So on my first attempt, I try to go through the regular right side route that we usually take. I'm scared the skeletons will loot the secret book chest before I can grab it, since I want as many of the stat boosters as possible if it's not too much of a tedium to get them, that is. And for a while, I do okay managing to keep the horde somewhat at bay using a longbow that I picked up on the previous chapter. I can take out one enemy while moving slowly back, going from corner to corner. Unfortunately for me, it only works for so long before I fully get surrounded, as I draw aggro from more enemies that were out of my vision range. So we have to reset, and on my second attempt, I use the strategy I talked about earlier to go through the left side of the map with the long one-tile corridor. That way I can kind of control the initial horde of reinforcements. It's actually quite tricky because the initial enemies can surround you quickly, since on turn 3, a bunch of reinforcements show up from like where you spawn. But if you kill one of the zombies on that left side corridor and then move back to kill a skeleton, letting the other 2 zombies through the passage, they leave one tile open at the entrance where you can just kind of sneak back around them. And then when the reinforcements also show up, you can just sit there and slowly kill all the reinforcements and the initial horde all at once, since there is nobody stressing you out from behind from that initial corridor. I could have moved back a little more and sit on the forest, but since I wasn't fully familiar with the enemy layout on this map, I decided to stay on this tile blocking the path at first to avoid getting sandwiched accidentally because I draw aggro from an enemy in the dark, because I'm aware that the boss on this map is located near the area at the bottom of this corridor. There are enemies in that area, so you just want to be a little bit more careful. Once we're mostly in the clear, we cleared out all these initial waves of enemies. I moved back towards the middle of the map because I am still looking for the secret book, which hasn't been looted yet, so we're getting lucky here. So advancing using torches to see my surrounding, I finally make it. So now I have to be careful because the end of this map can be crazy, as there are a ton of units behind that large door at the bottom, just waiting to spill out once I get in range. So I decide to once again take a safe approach, having made sure I know enemies behind me. I approach the large group at the bottom through the right side one tile corridor, again circumventing the door. With the same approach in mind, let them all trickle there and take them out one by one as they step on the tile in front of Ines to just remain safe. So once I've drawn aggro from all these enemies and the large group is taken out pretty easily, we can move forward. But I was terrified the entire time that reinforcements would spawn from behind and then sandwich me, but it wasn't the case. So we're happy with that. And once we slay the large group, the map simplifies. Eirika and Daza are both already dead, and now all that is left is the static units on the left side of the map, which I dispatch quite quickly. But that's a big sigh of relief, and we move on to chapter 12. Quick little aside before I get into the strategy for this map, I found it quite interesting that we're getting into the nitty gritty of these mid-game maps, as we usually kind of gloss over them. For once, they are truly challenging, not because Ines's stats are bad, but simply because of the 2 ranged lot unit. We have to be more cerebral about how we approach these maps, and I'm really enjoying being able to go through them in a more interesting way than, yeah, you just kind of charge through. For once, there's a little bit more strategy to it. So we'll skip ahead a little because the start really isn't that significant and consists mostly of me taking out all the spiders and all the units that can reach Ines before I cross a specific line in this map, which you should be seeing on screen right now, which triggers the first round of reinforcements. And you'd think that this map is well suited for Ines, given all the small corridors we've been talking about this entire time, that would allow us to choke point enemies easily. Well, in some way, yes, sometimes it does come in handy, and in other times, no, because a lot of the enemies on this map are flying gargoyles, so they can kind of just circumvent the choke point, and they will cause me a couple of resets at first as I try to get my bearing on this map to figure out what the hell do I have to do. So how are we handling this? Well, you might have noticed our friend Salah is a force deployed on this map, and there really isn't anywhere to place him that won't cause a distraction from the reinforcements. Salah is kind of just always in the way. So why not use him as a distraction? And we'll place him on a forest tile at the start of the map. So all the enemies that spawn from the left side will go towards him, and I'll load him up with a bunch of potions so he stays alive, and hopefully he dodges enough times. Meanwhile, I'll have Ines take out the other 3 gargoyles, which should be pretty easy, that spawn from the right side, and then his mission will be to rescue Salah before he dies. That won't be that easy though, and we'll need a couple of tries to make it happen, but eventually we do, and we can now move on to phase 2 of this map. Even when Ines shows up around all the enemies, they don't care about him and they still all attack Salah, which is nice for me. But for phase 2, the first thing we'll be taking care of is taking out as many enemies as possible before crossing the second line that triggers reinforcement. So kind of the same as in the first part of the map. While we do that, we'll grab Ewan's energy ring by recruiting him, since we learned a few videos ago that if Tethys isn't recruited, he doesn't join automatically. So we learned something then, and the energy ring will be pretty valuable for Ines. So we'll have 2 fresh bodies to block the reinforcement or to cause any form of distraction. So once we cross that line, 5 gargoyles spawn, and Salah once again will act as bait, and Ines will take care of them, as Salah is just sitting there like a juicy bait, and he does perish though after getting hit by 325% in a row. My man's got extremely unlucky, but the 2 extra gargoyle only have the option to attack Ines from range, because I made sure that Ines was only in their 2 range and not in their 1 range, so they will die to the counter attack. So all in all, there's only 3 gargoyles left, so we end up being pretty safe, all thanks to Salah's sacrifice. Beyond that, the map is really quite simple. We clear out the rest of the enemies and we can move on to chapter 13, which is a really easy map because it's a survive map, so we kind of just wait on a fort and farm some XP. But being surrounded here doesn't matter that much because it is a survive map, so once all the turns run out, we win the map. We also take a minute to pick up Emilia's Speedwing on this map, so we finally have that, and we seem to be in a pretty decent position heading into the next map. That map being chapter 14, and you'll see me use a strategy I haven't used since the Eirika run. You'll see me position Ines in the bottom right corner to stop the cavalier reinforcements from spawning in droves. You see normally 3 cavs spawn from there right out of the gate for 3 turns, so for a total of 9 cavaliers just spawning behind you. But if you put a character in on that little corner tile, luckily you can block 2 of them from spawning for some reason. The 3rd one will spawn, but it still allows you to take 1 out at a time. I did also learn that it's not only the 1 specific tile, there seems to be multiple tiles that block reinforcements, because I was standing on different tiles in that little corner and it blocked the reinforcements either way. So I guess you learn something new every day. Even in a game I've probably beat over 100 times, I seem to always learn something new every new video I release. So that's interesting. But yeah, next up we'll pick up the energy ring once the cavaliers are taken care of from the chest in the left side room of this map. And the rest will be pretty easy because most of it is corridors and hallways, and I can always put Ines in a decent position to just take out the enemies quickly. So he ends up having decent control over the most of this map, and he stays safe regardless most of the time. And there really isn't that many reinforcements, so we are safe on this map. And we'll zoom our butts right to Carlisle, and we'll make quick work of him before heading to chapter 15. And I'm taking a wild guess that this is the chapter most people in the comments guessed that the run would end on. So let's see if that's the case and those people are right. So what exactly is the plan here? We know that this chapter has tons of reinforcements and flying units. So my first thought process is that maybe I can lose all the enemies in the sand. Ines has slightly better mobility in there than most other infantry units since he's promoted, so why not give it a try? I can try to kite them around for as long as humanly possible. But that fails quite quickly, as even before I can say bye-bye Null for the first time, I get thoroughly surrounded and we have to reset. To be fair to Ines, Null did dodge, so props to him on that, but that first attempt was a pretty short attempt. So I tried something a little different. Instead of heading for the sands right away, I tried to take out a few enemies around spawn to see if that helps in any way, shape, or form. Spoiler alert, it really does not. The Pegasus reinforcements are really a pain in my butt. They really are quick and can surround you very quickly. But that is when I get an idea that might get me out of this pickle. You see on this map, there's ally reinforcements. And the way I usually handle those is quite simple. I let Null die for all of our collective enjoyment. But more importantly, I use Dussel to keep Ephraim alive, since he would be an easy game over condition otherwise, and probably would make this map impossible if I didn't protect him with the old man. Well, since Dussel has to be alive on this map to keep Ephraim safe, if I can get Ines to Dussel, I will bypass my being surrounded problem. Since if they stand one beside another, it kind of creates a buffer for Ines to eventually be able to move out of being surrounded. Also, I have to say that Null is still alive after a few rounds of combat. He is surviving this shaman pretty well. I gotta give it to him. So props to that. He even dodges his one cavalier attack at 79% chance. So I gotta give it to Null. He's putting in the work. But then he finally perishes. Good. So bye-bye, Null. But you did all right this time. Longest he survived, I think. Also, I think I need to give him extra props. Usually on this map in the bottom left corner, you see a huge SWAT of reinforcement pop out with a paladin in there and everything, but this time around, it's nowhere to be found. I think blocking the corners stops the reinforcements, but I'm not entirely sure, and I think Null surviving as long as he did stopped them from coming in, so thank you, Null, I guess? Anyways, as you see me take out this massive troop one enemy at a time, as Dussel is providing the correct buffer for Ines to clear out these enemies on this route map, let's talk about Ines's level 20. At first glance, everything seems alright. Low 20s for most stat and pretty decent defensive stats too. But let's pull up his averages and it'll become more apparent that he could have been a little better. Considering his one angelic robe, his HP is pretty good. Same goes for his defense with one Drago shield being on the average and his resistance being a little higher than the average. Same thing for his luck, which I'll count as being on the average of 22 with no stat booster used. So far, so good. But his speed skill both received one stat booster each and are both sitting right on the average, meaning he's 2 points behind on both of those stats. And when it comes to his strength, we are looking at 2 energy rings being used, meaning he is also 2 points behind where he should be. But to be fair, the strength cap for sniper is 25, so we'll say he's 1 point behind to be a little bit more realistic. But either way, he performs well defensively. But offensively, he's still a little behind where he should be. Although with all that being said, I must express that Ines, while being a little bit behind statistically, has not struggled at all in terms of taking care of enemies, dodging, surviving. He's been doing fantastic in this run. Outside of his 2-range issue, he's just been a monster and I'm not even worried about him at all so far. And you'll see I managed to clear out all the enemies around Dussel and Ines, and now the map simplifies. I can just walk out of there and start picking up the few items I'll want, those being the boots, body ring, and killer bow, and both bosses won't be that hard. And we'll manage to clear chapter 15, which if I'm being honest, I really thought that's where Ines was gonna soft lock due to all the reinforcements on this map, but it's okay. We found a way to somewhat cheese it and get out of there, and on to chapter 16, which will not be a walk in the park as it is reinforcements galore. Also, kind of like this chapter we just beat, and in this one, we don't get the luxury of having any friends to lean on. My first step will be pretty simple. I'll take out the few early troops that move, but given that most units don't come active on this map until you pass one of the 2 threshold, we will take a minute with our longbow to kill the one swordmaster we can reach over the wall, and then that's pretty much it for all the units we can kill early on. I'll also head around to the other side of the map to take out a couple more units there, but really at this point, I'm just kind of trying to figure out a way out of all the enemies rushing me, because they'll come from both sides since reinforcements spawn from behind and then the enemies from the front will attack. So it is a little risky. There's this thief running around, which we kill after he opens those 2 doors near Ines right now. And that's how we get the talisman, so that's good. We're going to be using that soon to get our extra resistance. But keep in mind the doors he opened for us, because they will somewhat be relevant later on. But as I'm playing the map, I don't realize that fact right away. So I try another strategy. I take a book out of FE7. I'm not sure if this works on every map in that game, but I know that on the map Cog of Destiny, there is a weird quirk where if you wait over 100 turns, the game will actually not spawn any reinforcements, meaning you can make the map a smidge easier by doing that. So I try to recreate this in FE8. Maybe it's a bug in the GBA games and we'll see if it works here. Maybe it was passed on from one game to the other. And we try that out because I'm honestly not seeing a world where I don't get surrounded, considering all the troops coming from the front and then the reinforcements from the back. At the very least, if there's only the current units on the map, I can slowly chip them down using the long corridor forest I'm in right now on the left side. So I attempt this trick, hoping it'll work. And now that we're past 100 turns, let's step over the line and hope it works. So the enemy charge me, as we can see. And do we get the reinforcements? Yes, we do. Well, it was worth a try at least. Don't worry, if we manage to solo the entire game with Ines, I'll dock some 80 turns off the final turn count to be a little fairer, since this ended up being a bust of a strategy. But that means I'll have to come up with a plan quickly, and that's when it hits me. I'm actually in no real danger of getting sandwiched. Thanks to the thief from earlier, if I place myself in the doorway the thief opened earlier in that little room that leads to the other chest room, I'm entirely safe because no one can come in from behind, since the thief didn't have the opportunity to open the final door. I'm essentially safe from being surrounded as long as that second door at the bottom doesn't get open. So I have plenty of time to kill all the enemy before that even happens, because there's another thief that spawned, and if he decides to go for that, then yes, I'm a little stressed, but I think I can manage to eke out as many kills as possible from that position. I am relatively safe here, since Ines is a surprisingly good defensive unit. He's speedy enough to dodge, the big damage dealer, but also has enough defensive stat that I can tank a little bit. The one thing is we are not on a tile that provides any help at dodging, and we do clear out quite a bit of units this way. However, the thief starts approaching. I get a little scared because if he does open that final door, while the enemies are all in my face currently, I'm scared the thief will attack from the back, and or the enemy will wise up and try to surround me from the bottom. Maybe the AI is smart enough to recognize that, but I'm not entirely sure if it is. Luckily, once the door opened, the enemies don't move and the thief's AI is coded to run away. So we're actually in the clear, and the map is starting to feel a little less scary. Once we've cleared all the reinforcements, now just the throne room is left. And while that is not a given, it's not as hard as the previous thing, because we can approach slowly and start taking units one at a time as they trickle towards us, as to not overwhelm Ines. And he'll be really good here, getting some lucky dodges and allowing us to make our way to our old friend Orson, who won't be a huge problem. And that is one more map down as Ines stays in this run, and I'm starting to get impressed about how far he can make it without one range attack. So I guess we'll move on to chapter 17, which is another one of those chapters that can get quite overwhelming. My first instinct is to go through the center and destroy the snag, but that ends up slowing me down since it allows the mage to block my way. Then Serene and the villagers die quite quickly, which opens the door for both druid reinforcements and the flyers to surround us and block our way. So we might have to reevaluate how we approach this, and I have a little bit of an idea. And instead of taking down the snag, we'll kill the first mage by walking on the water. We'll be just in range to kill him from the water. And that means that on enemy phase, both remaining mage and sage in that area will have to attack from range and die. Luckily enough for us, Cyrene stays alive an extra turn to help us out to distract those flyers. And in the next turn, we'll step on the island, which will be an extra turn. And right after that, we can simply rush Ines all the way forward. He's not quite in range, but we are in range if we use the longbow we picked up a lot of chapters earlier. So we can start killing Leon with the longbow. Here's to hoping we have enough uses to take Leon number 1 down. Luckily, that starts off with a crit, and we end up bringing it home with 3 uses left. So we get it done, which brings us to chapter 18, as the previous map was only to kill the boss. But before we get to chapter 18, we stop at the armory and buy a ridiculous amount of killer bow and longbows just to simplify our lives, as some 3 range potential will be good on chapter 18, but honestly, it's one I'm not fearing too much, as a lot of this map normally involves kiting around a lot of enemies, so I'm not expecting it to be much of a problem for Ines, as that's what he's been doing this entire time. I think this will be probably one of his easier matchups. And it turns out I'm right. With correct positioning and the longbow, we managed to clear the Gorgons that rush you down at the start pretty easily, as they all spawn at kind of staggered intervals. So once they're all spawned, we just move down to the spot where it's a 1 tile space here in the middle and start funneling them through. After that, it simply becomes a question of clearing out each area slowly but surely. And while there is a risk of stone, it doesn't happen at all, and Ines still remains surprisingly good at not dying. I feel like, other than being surrounded, I haven't had to worry about dying at all with this run so far. So big props to this character right now. So we clear chapter 18, we finish it up, and it's time for chapter 19, which is one of the easiest for Ines, as we pick up Mansell, sit our butt on the throne. Despite being surrounded, this is the one map where that doesn't matter too much, and we are now 2 maps to the end. 2 maps, chapter 20 and the final chapter. I wasn't expecting Ines to be this good, but let's boot up chapter 20, and hopefully we find a way around the onslaught of monster units on that map. Let's begin the map by setting up with the longbow. That way I quickly take out one of the archer skeletons and the Gorgon straight away. You'll see, however, very quickly that a lot of units are heading towards our position, and not many of them have a ranged option available to them. So we can't really put ourselves at 2 range and hope we can counterattack. They only attack from melee range, at least most of them. So we'll try to still take them out 1 at a time and position ourselves intelligently, but very quickly we'll get overwhelmed as more flyers and centaurs start making their way towards us. And even with using the longbow to keep some distance between the enemies and I, there isn't a lot of space to back up in that starting area of this map. And no real 1 tile choke point. It really just is a 2 tile opening at the mouth where the mountains are, which means Ines can get surrounded, and even if it were a 1 tile opening, the flying units could get around, so we're kind of in a pickle either way. So I try time and time and time again. I can never make it out of this starting area. Nothing seems to work. I'm constantly surrounded. And this time around, I do not have the luxury of having a force deployed unit to play around, to kind of use as a buffer. It's just little old Ines and a ton of reinforcements. So what is the creative solution I find to get around this? Well, it's that there is no solution. It's kind of a bummer that this is the point of no return for Ines, because he is stuck at 2 range. He simply can't make it out of this map on his own, since he gets surrounded by an onslaught of enemies. I was expecting something a little bit more epic for the end, like I make it halfway through, but no, the map simply says, no, you're not continuing. But this is where it ends at the start of the map without any fanfare, little anticlimactic, but I'm pretty surprised and shocked how far he made it. I really thought the run would end sooner, and look, I know some maps who use some force deploys to create buffers and such, but I see that as using all the resources available to me to get the W. If you personally view it differently, that's honestly fine, and you can consider the real endpoint of being chapter 9. At the end of the day, all that really matters is that Ines can't solo Fire Emblem 8 on his own. So where does this leave us? Well, I did go back and try to cheat my way through chapter 20, just to see if this final map of the game was possible, since I was close to it. But don't worry, I'm not counting it in the rankings. I just wanted to see what was possible. So that's the footage you'll see in the background as we talk here. But technically the last map is possible with Ines because of Ephraim's presence, which forces some units away from Ines at times, and the longbow, which allows us to beat Leon down easily, and then we do some pretty good damage to the Demon King. But I digress. It would have been interesting to see what his true final stats were, but alas, Ines's run ends on chapter 20. So where does that put him in the ranking? Well, it's pretty easy, at the very bottom, which is a shame, because while his time and turns were bound to be pretty abysmal, because he's locked at 2 range and every map takes a little longer given he can't take advantage of enemy phase at all. It was fun to be creative with placement and pathing with Ines, and it was a genuinely easy run outside of that. Even his damage against the Demon King, as you'll see in a few minutes, was pretty decent, at least enough to place him potentially above Garcia or Combe. But no, we finally found a worse unit to solo FE8 with than Eirika, and it's not short of his abilities, it's short of his weapon type, which sucks a lot for him, but I guess it's fun for Eirika. I must say this was one of my favorite solo runs to do in a long time. Just having to think outside the box felt refreshing, and it's probably been one of the most interesting characters to run with so far. Something I love too about this run is how much the early chapter gave me information and taught me a lot, especially for the Name run that is going to be upcoming at some point. But doing this first taught me a lot of things about the run for Name, and I hope it will unlock the difficulty for me a bit and allow me to take some things into that run to make it a little bit easier and bring that video to you guys sooner rather than later. Before we end, the last point I want to touch on, as you may have noticed, the tier list changed a little bit. I want to thank you all for the feedback in the Sala video. A lot of you had creative ideas to do with the rankings, and I appreciate the input. For now, I decided to adjust some of the ranking, as you all made very valid points. I may have judged Sala too harshly, so I bumped him up just below Loot. I maintained the point that Loot felt much easier in the final map than Sala, hence her staying above. But it's by a very slim margin. In the end, I also removed one of the resets from Loot's ranking, as I felt it was misleading. The first reset of that run was basically a test for all magic character to just see if I had to adjust the first shop or not to add a tome earlier, so I think it's unfair to hold her to that reset. The second one I kept because while it was mostly my error, it's still a useful piece of information. Since we know that she can't solo no matter what, she needs a specific item to do so. The other adjustment I did was move Ford down to the top of the third tier. While it's true he did better than Kyle and Amelia, I think it's important to note that he had a reset and also had the luxury of me running through the game with Kyle right beforehand. I'll keep him above Kyle because Ford gets so little wins in his life. I at least want to give him one FE tuber who doesn't entirely hate him. But anyways, jokes aside, thank you all for your feedback on the ranking and how to make them better. I'll make a more dedicated video to the tier list, maybe once I'm done with all the units and implement some of the suggestions, then to come up with a definitive edition of the ranking. But for now, we'll keep this simple, inaccurate format as it's visually a little easier to handle for my brain. But once we're done with all the runs, I think we'll revisit the series and try to incorporate some math in the whole thing and come up with something slightly more scientific. I'd like to thank you all for watching the videos. I know this was a long one, but please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't yet. And if you did enjoy the video, thank you to all my members, but a special shout out goes to my tier 2 and 3 members, those being Brawler456, Forgotten Fox, Hirame, Case, Iron Wolf, Storm Eagle CH, Scott Rounch, Black Rose 32, Rogue Arcadia, Stylish, A Grumpy Bear, and Ollie. Thanks to all of you. Becoming a member is one of the best ways to support the channel, and it's the best way to help me go full-time with content creation. So check out the tiers below and all the cool perks available to you. Thank you all for watching and have a wonderful rest of your day, week, month, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.